In a co-authored paper with a student, we focused on what we called the inner freedoms. So we actually looked at 3 freedoms: freedom of thought, freedom of belief, and freedom of opinion. These are the so-called inner freedoms because on the one hand, they look like they're something that's just inside the person, but they still need protection as freedoms because they're external things the state can do that interfere with them.
Freedom of opinion, freedom of thought, and freedom of belief are often lumped together with the external freedoms, so the manifestations of those, like freedom of religion and freedom of expression. But we were really trying to identify and zero in on why they're different and why they're included, because to understand freedom of opinion in a court basis, sometimes that's difficult to see rulings on just opinion without seeing it expressed. But we have seen cases where they do deal with it, and we know from the drafting process, which is really what I was looking at, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we know that there was a lot of deliberate decisions to put in what I call, or what we've called, inner freedoms of opinion and belief and thought, because they really protect the core convictions or beliefs of a person that allow them to then go and express them. If we want to have a democracy, or we want to have neutrality, and we want to have the ability to discuss with another person, we need the protection of freedom of opinion and freedom of belief, freedom of thought, because they allow a person, as actually one of the delegates said of the UDHR, they allow you to become and to be and to follow your conscience and to make those actions. And it really doesn't matter if you have freedom of expression if you don't have freedom of opinion. In Canada, we want to protect our democracy, so you wouldn't want the government making you sign on to beliefs that you didn't inwardly believe, that don't affect another person. You can think and hold opinions however you'd like, because it allows you to be able to have these conversations with people and pursue truth together. You need to be corrected, you need to put in your point of view. But if opinions are being curtailed or limited by the government, or thoughts or beliefs, then you can't have real open discourse and open democracy. I hope that the courts, and there's more scholarship on freedom of opinion and belief and thought as distinct from religious and expression. Opinions are now becoming really politically correct, or what the majority sees as okay, or what's not controversial. But opinions, people are very scared to give these opinions out front and to talk about things, so then there isn't correction, and we see a lot of isolation, people in isolated pockets that seem to be expressing themselves in very aggressive ways. And I think that comes with not realizing that you have the freedom to have an opinion without maybe expressing it in a negative way.
The Charter protects freedom of expression. The Charter also protects freedom of the press and other media of communication. One of the key things is not only are we protected in speaking to each other, but the various means that we would get our message out there through print or through radio or TV or other communication, internet, email, videos, and so on, that the Charter actually also protects these media of communication. There's a question of what else that might mean. Is it just the pamphlet or just the video that's protected, or am I also protected in gathering information, doing research, doing an interview? Do I have protection against the government stopping me from doing that, or the government taking my research notes, and so on? How far does this freedom extend? Obviously, the Charter means to protect more than just the freedom to express myself in one way, say by speech. It also means to protect us, our ability to get our message out there, even if it's unpopular.
Well, I think expression is one of those foundational freedoms in any Western constitutional democracy. The ability to speak your mind, to engage with others in dialogue about what the values of a society should be, what we ought to do, even to non-social contract kind of expression, or democratic expression that provides personal fulfillment. Whether that's singing, whether that's joking with friends, or whatever. People should be free to engage in that within reasonable limits. But when it comes to the internet, I think it's interesting because we're reaching a new frontier where a lot of our previous approaches, legal approaches to how we deal with expression and how it should be regulated, go out the window when we deal with the internet. I think that the internet itself is protected under the Charter, under Section 2B, because for the longest time, we've considered freedom of expression under the Charter to just deal with the expressive content, the ability to say something. But if you look deeply at the actual language of that provision of Section 2B, it not only provides protections for opinion, thought, belief, and expression, but also, critically, the method through which that expression occurs. So it mentions freedom of the press an other media of communication. And I think that other media of communication, that phrase has never been really judicially interpreted or seldomly been interpreted. And I think that language opens the door for recognizing that you can engage in expressive content, you can express yourself, but it doesn't really mean anything if the method through which you express it, whether it's through the press, if you're a journalist, through the internet, if you're an internet user, or if you're a worker engaged in a protest, labor picketing or things of that nature. If you can actually effectively use the mediums or methods of expression, for instance, for a reporter, if you can't keep your journalists or your sources confidential, or if you can't attend a court proceeding to report on what's going on in a criminal prosecution. If you can't engage in the medium that you're using to effectively engage in the expression you want to engage in, that's problematic. So I think Section 2B was drafted and addresses this issue where it protects the expressive content, so what you're actually saying, but also in certain instances, the method through which you express it.
I think it's fundamental in a couple of ways. One, the Charter talks in Section 1 about a free and democratic society. Now, in order to be a free and democratic society, even to talk about what that means, we have to have the freedom to talk about it and to be able to speak about it with each other and people across the country. You need to keep those media of communication free from censorship. In some countries, the government does control various media of communication. They do censor things on the internet that may not be inherently dangerous or violent or advocating violence, but that are simply espousing views that those in power disapprove of. And so our charter protects us against that kind of government interference.
We're kind of at a loss when it comes to fundamental freedoms, particularly freedom of expression and the internet. We see a lot of terrible things going on the internet when it comes to expression. A lot of hate, a lot of divisive language that has inspired acts of violence, acts of terrorism. So there is a need to regulate expression on the internet. But how do we do this in a fair way, in a proper way?
There are two dangers in having a number of forgotten freedoms, including these three. One of those dangers is that if they're not given independent protection, the state can end up interfering with them, and there might not be a claim that could be made under one of the freedoms that's remembered, as it were. And so the state could end up interfering with them in ways that it's not meant to be able to do. The other thing is that the presence of these freedoms alongside the other freedoms should shape how we read all the freedoms together. And if we forget about some of the freedoms when we're working on interpreting the freedoms that have more case law, we end up with a bit of a distorted picture of what those other freedoms are actually doing in light of the whole text.
We've created this video series for you, and we hope that through this series, you'll learn a little bit more about the guarantees that you enjoy in Canada.